Hey, I'm Cheryl from We're in the Rockies. My husband Matt is behind the camera. And today we are starting a 5-day road trip through the wonderful state of Wyoming. The purpose of our channel is to help people travel to the west. And what we are doing on this trip is we are going to be visiting Pinedale, the Wind Rivers, Lander, and the wonderful, beautiful Grand Tetons, as well as some other fun sites along the way.
The Wind Rivers are a mountain range in western Wyoming. If you're driving from the east, they are the entry point to Grand Teton National Park and the Jackson Hole Valley. In this video, we'll make a loop around the mountain range. Starting in Kemmerer, we'll head to Pinedale for some steaks and history. Then into Jackson Hole to enjoy more of the Grand Tetons, the Wind River's more famous brother. Then we'll pass through Dubois and Lander for World War II tanks, wild horses, and more scenery. Finally, we'll stop at South Pass, one of the most important Oregon Trail sites.
To start off, we are here at Fossil Butte National Monument near Kemmerer, Wyoming. It's about 2 hours south of Pinedale. This is honestly a park that I did not know anything about, and I am wowed by this park. Looking behind me, it probably doesn't look like anything that special, but the special thing about Fossil Butte is that it used to be a lake, and there are literally millions of fossils in this land behind me. In fact, the national park used to let people dig up fossils right here at this national monument. Now you kind of have to go to some private places to do that, and we're going to do that today. But this is really a fantastic and unique national monument. As you approach it, you're going to be seeing a timeline just from the Fossil Butte sign where you take your picture, and it's going to be telling you what's going on. Then you get out of your car and you start walking in, and right here, here's where humans show up. The very end, look how close those are. It really does give you an idea of just the short amount of time us human beings have been on the planet. I would say one of the big stars of this whole area is the visitor center. It really is interesting to me how some places that are these big fancy national parks, lackluster visitor centers, but that's not the case here at Fossil Butte. This is one of the most technologically advanced visitor centers I've ever seen. I'm going to say this place is the king of dioramas. There are lots of dioramas that look very real, and there are just hundreds of fossils of birds, plants, insects, fish, and even crocodiles in here. Just, specimens that were at the lake when it fossilized over. And there's some cool kind of virtual reality displays of fish that were in the lake, and I just find this super impressive. I would say absolutely, if you're in the area, you got to stop here. It's probably a 2 to 3 hour stop.
We got a junior ranger program also, and we're going to go down and actually dig for our own fossils with a business down the road.
And a nice little picnic table to have a picnic. Our family enjoyed doing that too. So we just drove down the street to Ulrich's Fossils. This is a private business that actually will take people in a van up to the quarry where they can actually dig for their own fossils and find some pretty cool stuff. They do keep some of their stones right here behind me for children to come explore, and our kids found some cool stuff like some fish. We really liked our experience here at Ulrich's and would recommend this company.
And so these are fossils. You actually get to keep your own fossils from millions of years ago. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you just get a little chisel and a hammer and go at it.
This is so fun.
Nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thanks for letting me do this.
The first JCPenney store is right here in Kemmerer, Wyoming. They call this the Mother Store. Founded way back, I think, early 1900s by James Cash Penny. What a crazy name is that, right? He's got cash in his name and penny in his name. He's a store owner. Turned this store into a really big store. Of course, everybody knows about JCPenney, right? It ended up buying out a bunch of other stores. It began as the Golden Rule store. Then he kind of broke off from them, formed JCPenney, and formed a big empire type of a thing. But sadly, as of I think 2020, JCPenney declared bankruptcy. Still in business, restructuring some things, but not doing all that well in today's modern economy. But kind of a funny little quirky site here in Kemmerer, Wyoming, a city with a strange name. Okay, up next is to visit Pinedale, Wyoming. So this is kind of like the gateway to the Wind Rivers. Behind me is the Wind River Mountains, so these next few segments will be in Pinedale. So the first thing to do in Pinedale here is this Sacred Rim Trail. This is a hike that's about 4 miles round trip, or out and back as they call it, meaning it's 2 miles one way, 2 miles back. One of the easier ways to get a look at the Wind Rivers. The Wind Rivers is a pretty famous mountain formation that's just east of the Tetons and is pretty famous for being a backcountry area. So you can hire guides horseback trips, hiking guides to get back deep into the Wind Rivers and spend a few nights and get to some of the real famous formations. They're kind of like the Dolomites, the Italian Dolomites here in Wyoming. The guy down in Pinedale today told me that some of these guides will actually drop your stuff off deep in the Wind Rivers where you're going to be that night, and they GPS locate it and you can get there. This trail is a fairly flat trail and a nice easy way to see the Wind Rivers. And then the ride up here from the town of Pinedale below is a real scenic ride past a couple of lakes and a real beautiful introduction to the Wind Rivers where we're going to be trying to explore over the next couple of days. So now we're going to go down into the city of Pinedale and do the pitchfork fondue.
Next up is to do pitchfork fondue in Pinedale. This is such a fun cowboy cookout that luckily this is a just show up. Normally when we do these Western cookouts, we have to get reservations in advance. But this is fun. It's held right at the rodeo ground, so you can see people riding their horses around, and then you come in. They have these Western kettle chips that are delicious and tons of different sauces to try. Then they're gonna give you some brats and bread that are yummy. There's a salad bar with their signature berry vinaigrette, which was really good, and some fresh cut fruit. Then they come and they take your order, and you can choose from chicken, steak, trout, or a hot dog. And our family, we tried all four because there's 4 of us and we wanted to try a little bit of all of them. They'll also serve you a baked potato that's yummy. God, I'm trying to think about what everyone's favorite was. I tried the trout and it was delicious, and it was like a big piece of trout. And you know, in the West, eating trout, that's how we get our seafood unless we ship it in. So if you want fresh seafood, you got to eat trout. Matt and our daughter were digging the chicken. Our daughter couldn't get enough of it, and our son was loving his steak. And my favorite dipping sauce was a sriracha. That was super good. Matt loved the honey Dijon barbecue. And what meat did you like the best?
I have only tried the chicken actually. So.
Oh. Then we're still waiting for dessert, but it's starting to get a little dark. But we are going to either get to choose a brownie or a lemon bar. And I've heard the lemon bars are the best. So my hopes for those is that they're really good.
Okay, so we've done some other cookouts in Wyoming. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Okay, this one is delicious. And the pitchfork concept is so cool. They have your steak on the end of a pitchfork and they're dipping it in boiling water and cooking it. And it's really fun to kind of see their setup. And their bread was super good. And their chips were super good. I think that this might be the best quality food. It's super good. Best experience though is the cookout at Roosevelt in Yellowstone. And that's because you get to go ride either a horse or take a chuck wagon out there. And then there's like singing and jokes, and it's a whole experience, and the food was delicious too. So yeah, we've done some great cookouts in the West, and I say if you're coming on a trip to the West, you gotta rustle up some grub at a cookout. Next up is to do the art walking tour of Pinedale. There's actually 2 little walking trails you can do. You can do the history or the art, and we started off wanting to do both of them, but we were overcome by the art.
Overcome by art.
So we've got one of these fun murals behind me, and this little walking trail is great. There's 17 stops on it. We've hit most of them in about 40 minutes, about like a mile of distance, so not difficult. And the town of Pinedale is just a really nice sized town. I like that it's not a tourist trap, but it's not a ghost town either. There's a little bit going on here, but not too much. But the Trail of Art mostly has sculptures and murals, and it's pretty enjoyable. And one of the highlights of it was when we walked through Legion Park. That is a really beautiful park that has a walkway, it has a river running through it, and some nice little art pieces. And the locals have told us that they find moose in their park sometimes. We didn't see a moose today. We're still on the lookout for a moose.
Okay, the next thing to do in Pinedale is to eat here at the Wrangler Cafe. This is the place we heard was where you need to go for breakfast. This is where the locals go. The guy at the hotel said if you eat breakfast here, you're not gonna need to eat lunch today. So they did have big portions. Cheryl got some pancakes, a pancake stack, and they were huge, 3 of them on her plate, filled up the whole plate. Got some French toast and bacon. So standard breakfast fare. They did have some skillets and some burritos and some things, you know, some other things, but we just kind of got the standard stuff. But anyway, if you're in Pinedale, here's a good little place for you to eat breakfast. Okay, up next to do in Pinedale is to visit the Museum of the Mountain Man. I was kind of geeking out on this here just a little bit this morning as we've been visiting here for the last hour or so. I wanted to tell you just a few things to know. First of all, about the Mountain Man, then about the museum, and then kind of give you my rating of this here. First of all, just the Mountain Men. The Mountain Man time period in American history was about a 20-year time period, for about 1820 to 1840, right around in there. The next thing to know about it is that they were here to trap beavers. They were actually company men. So a lot of times you think of the mountain men as these individual guys that are just kind of going off into the mountains on their own, but they actually were all working for companies to come out here to trap beavers. Well, maybe not all of them, but most of them were working for companies. Come out here and trap beavers to make top hats. That was the style of the day, is these top hats and the beavers. That's what they used them for, the beaver pelts. They were kind of put out of business by silk. China ended up making silk top hats, and that kind of put the mountain men out of business. But right at the time they were kind of going out of business, that was around 1840s when people started immigrating out to the western states, out through the Rockies and stuff. So these mountain men became important guides because they had already explored around so much of the Rockies that they kind of knew the best paths to get through the Rockies. They actually played quite an important role in the story of America. They often, because they were out here on their own, they often intermingled with the Indians. Of course, they traded. Commonly, they intermarried with a lot of the Native Americans. In fact, this area here was a big mountain man rendezvous site. The mountain man rendezvous were a collection of Native Americans and mountain men coming together to trade goods. And one thing I learned in there were 16 different rendezvous that they have on record all throughout, let's see, Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. And 6 of them were here in this Pinedale area. In fact, I'm going to drive over to see the Mountain Man Rendezvous site, the actual place that they held their rendezvous here, in just a moment. Okay, so thanks for indulging me on a little bit of the trail down history here. The museum is kind of a small museum. This building behind me here is basically what you see, but wow, they had a lot of incredible things in there, I thought. Just artwork. They had a teepee that was made by this Native American named Bad Hand, who is just an amazing speaker. He comes here every year and gives a talk, and he actually made this teepee out of buffalo hide, just like the old Plains Indians used to. That reminds me, by the way, they do hold a yearly rendezvous kind of recreation or celebration here in July every year in Pinedale. So if you're coming to Pinedale, think about planning your trip around there if possible. But anyway, the teepee was amazing, the artwork, the sculptures. They had a ton of guns, they had a ton of animals in there. I mean, for being a real small museum here, this is really nice, really well done in there. I mean, I'm giving this like a 9. If you're in Pinedale, for certain, definitely recommend coming to the Museum of the Mountain Man. Okay, so the next thing is to visit the actual site of the Mountain Man Rendezvous. I mentioned that there were 6 that were held in this little valley in Pinedale. Later on this trip, we're going to go to Lander and Riverton, which is on the other side of the Wind River Mountains, and they also held some rendezvous there. This was the big one here, which is really cool because it looks a lot like that painting we saw at the Mountain Man Museum. So it's really cool just to sit here and think about how these guys would have gathered here, these Native Americans, these mountain men would have gathered here and held just a week-long party and traded goods and drank and all that stuff. I mentioned that these mountain men, most of them worked for these companies. One of these companies was called the Hudson Bay Company, an early fur trading company that operated in Canada and in the United States. That company, the Hudson Bay Company, is still in business today. They do retail and all that, so it's just crazy to think about some of these old companies back from the 1700s that still exist today in a completely different type of business.
Next up is the Granite Hot Springs area. It is an hour south of Jackson. It's a really beautiful and not very traveled area. The Granite Hot Springs area has some boondocking. It has some established camping, like 50 to 80 sites that are first come first serve. You don't reserve them, and this campground rarely fills up, which is kind of nice if you get aced out near Teton. And it has a waterfall, not a hiking to waterfall, but a waterfall that you can just park and get out of your car and go see it. And the Granite Hot Springs behind me. Matt was saying he thinks this was built by the CCC in the 1930s, and it does look pretty old and it's pretty primitive. Just driving out to this Granite Hot Springs area, you go on a dirt road for 10 miles. It's pretty bumpy, And even when you get to the Granite Hot Springs pool area, you park, I would say, about 1/10 of a mile away, and then you have to walk on a dirt road to get here. They only take cash or check, and it's run by the Forest Service. We've been to several hot springs in the West. This is the least developed of them. Like, it's just a pool. It's not anything too fancy, but what I really like about it is the views you have while you're at the pool. You are surrounded by beautiful granite peaks and pine trees, and it's just a nice view. This is also a pretty inexpensive place. It's only $8 per adult and $5 per children. The hot springs are 90 degrees in the summertime and around 112 in the winter time. So the only bummer thing about the hot springs right now is that it's a pretty warm day, and so we haven't really wanted to be in the hot springs too much because it's too hot. But coming here at night would be amazing, or spring or fall would be really good. So I really like the Granite Hot Springs area. I would say if you are on a casual road trip where you need kind of a down day, this would be a good idea. But if you're trying to hit the best sites of Grand Teton, I'd probably skip Granite Hot Springs if you were limited on time. But yeah, if you have time, come out here and do it.
You have a final rating for it?
Final rating? Oh, I give it a 9. It's really, really nice, and I loved the drive in here with the river. It was so beautiful and scenic.
Okay, the next thing to do is Grand Teton National Park. So we're in Grand Teton right now. We are at Jenny Lake right now. This is kind of the crown jewel of Grand Teton. So Grand Teton is not really in the Wind Rivers. These two mountain ranges, the Wind Rivers and the Tetons here, are kind of cousins, I'm guessing. Notice how they're very rocky and kind of jagged up at the top. That means they're younger mountain ranges in terms of how, when they came out of the ground, basically when they got formed, they're very, very young mountain ranges. But the rocks that make up the mountains are actually extremely old, like half of the Earth's age, basically. So that's one thing that makes these, both the Wind Rivers and the Tetons, so cool. It's just these jagged mountain peaks. Okay, so we're in Grand Teton right now. We're gonna do the next couple of segments here in Grand Teton. Now here at Jenny Lake, what you can do is take a boat ride across the lake. I think it's about 20 bucks a person. Kids are a little cheaper. And then when you get across the lake, you can hike up to a little place called Hidden Falls, which is really beautiful. In fact, Cheryl and I just spent the last week in Glacier National Park where we saw like 30 waterfalls. So many waterfalls, we can't even count them. This rivals just about any of those, I would think, right, Cheryl? Mm-hmm. We think this is really a spectacular waterfall. And then if you keep going up the hill a little bit, you get to a place called Inspiration Point, which will overlook the lake and the Jackson Hole Valley. We were with our friends. We met our friends here, so that was kind of fun. We went up there and we were in a real rush because the last boat comes over currently at 7 o'clock. The time's changed a little bit. But anyway, we had to get back down to the boat dock before it came over, so we didn't miss it. Now, real quick, while we're here at Grand Teton, I just want to explain. These are the Teton Mountains, and this is in Grand Teton National Park. Grand Teton National Park encompasses much of the Jackson Hole Valley, the valley floor and everything. The city of Jackson, though, is on the south end of the Jackson Hole Valley and is not in Grand Teton National Park, but it's kind of right on the border. But those the terminology is a little weird. So there's the city of Jackson, the valley of Jackson Hole. Let's take a look at what else we can do in Grand Teton.
Next up is the historic Mormon Row at Grand Teton. You probably recognize this barn behind me. It's the Molten Barn, and it's one of the most photographed places in Grand Teton. If you come here at 5:30 in the morning at sunrise, you're gonna see probably 25 people out here taking their pictures and getting one of the best pictures I'll ever get. One of the best things about Grand Teton is how many pictures you can take of just such beautiful scenery. There's Oxbow Bend and there's the Snake River overlook. So there's a lot of really great photography moments. And so bring your camera when you come out to the Wind Rivers area in Grand Teton, because there is a lot of things to take pictures of. Now, just a little bit about Mormon Row. Mormon settlers came into this valley and set up a little settlement, and the Molten Barn was owned by one of the settlers, and there's a few other buildings that you can come look in and see what life was like in those early days. Some of the buildings are recently acquired by the national park, and they're kind of a work in progress. Last time we were here, we weren't able to go into them, and it's about 8 o'clock at night right now, and we can't go into them right now, but I'm a little curious if maybe you can go into them during the day. If you're visiting and you see that you can go tour these during the day, put it in the comments so everyone knows you can check out those buildings too. One other special thing about Mormon Row is it's home to a lot of wildlife. As you drive through, it's a dirt road, but it's pretty graded. You'll see wildlife like bison and pronghorn, so a great place to catch wildlife in the morning and the evening too.
So the next thing to do is to watch a sunrise at Grand Teton National Park. I have seen sunrises over the last 2 years. I've seen sunrises at the Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, Glacier National Park, and let me tell you, the only thing that rivals the Grand Teton sunrises is Bryce Canyon. Now those are spectacular, those are just amazing. They probably beat Grand Teton, but this is a close second, and you can see that the sun is rising and hitting those mighty Tetons. It is a thing to do. There's a lot of photographers that gather around to take pictures of the sunrise here in Grand Teton National Park. If you're up for it, get up really early, around 5:30 or so. Get over here. The sun's rising right now about 6:30. Get over here to one of just many different overlooks that you can get really nice pictures of the sun hitting those mighty Tetons.
Next up is to grab some grub. We are in the historic town of Jackson, a really fun, famous spot for people to visit. And we went to SIDEWINDER's to get some food. And the reason why we came here was, first, it was really highly rated online. And then the locals, the employees we talked to within Grand Teton National Park said this is the place to go. And the other nice thing about this place is it's not in the middle of downtown. Now I know that might appeal to some people, but parking can be a real issue. And the pricing at this restaurant was very optimal. It was quite a relief to only pay between $12 and $15 for an entree instead of like 18 and up. And these were nice meals. Some of the people we went with, they got the cowboy macaroni and cheese, looked amazing. I got their very signature and featured on TV pretzel. It comes in the shape of an S. You can stuff it with cheese and pepperoni. It was super good. Next up is to go raft the Snake River through Grand Teton National Park. There are only a couple of companies that are allowed to bring their raft through Grand Teton, and Triangle X is one of them. And then outside in Jackson, there are a lot of other companies that will do whitewater raft trips. The one we went on was a scenic float, and it was actually paired with a dinner. And so how it worked is they picked us up kind of by Dornans, which is a pretty central part of the, I guess, central southern part of the park, and they drove us up about 10 miles and they fed us dinner. We had ribs, steak, and I had a veggie burger. There was salad, rolls, a cookie, you know, a little bit of country music going on, so a little bit of a chuck wagon feel. And then we got to float 10 miles down the Snake River, and something that was so special about this trip was we saw a lot of wildlife, including several bald eagles and several beaver, which made it really fun. The raft sizes were smaller. There were 12 passengers on the raft. It's very sturdy. Got a few little drops of water on me, but not anything too crazy. Very safe to take young children on. The Grand Tetons are so beautiful. It's prairie next to jagged mountain peaks, and to be able to be on the water with that cool breeze, a little cooler on the water anyway, and to be able to have an hour and a half to view those mountains as you float down is a really special way to experience Grand Teton. And if you are interested in rafting in Grand Teton, which I feel like if you want to say you've done Teton properly, you got to get on the river at some point. We have an article all about river rafting, whether you want to do whitewater or an in-the-park scenic float.
Up next is to go to the Hootenanny. This is at Dornans. This is actually technically just outside of Grand Teton, but it's actually right in the middle of the park. It's right in the heart. Dornans is a company that runs many things around here, like rentals, and they have a few restaurants and stuff. And every Monday night they do the Hootenanny. Now this is actually like a live music venue, and it's not just some live music though. What's really cool about this is some guy started this back in the 1960s, actually a really well-known guy around Grand Teton, and it is still going as a tradition. What's cool is the live music is anybody who wants to. Anybody can do it. I guess it's common for a lot of people to just be traveling through this area. Musicians, they're just traveling through, and they'll come in here and sign up to sing at the Hootenanny, and they have to do 2 songs. One has to be like an American song, and then the other one can be kind of whatever they want it to be. And the thing is, the crowd is really respectful of these musicians. So even the ones that aren't all that great, they really get the respect of the crowd. You're supposed to be kind of keep your voices down so that they can perform. And so it's really kind of a cool tradition. This is the first time we've done it. We really enjoyed it. Again, it's only on Monday nights. So you need to come here if you are in Grand Teton. Try to get some time to come over here on a Monday night to see the Hootenanny. One other thing I wanted to tell you about that, from my understanding, John Denver performed here way back in the day as he was coming through on a road trip or something like that, maybe a tour. But anyway, he stopped in here at the Hootenanny and performed, according to my understanding. So kind of a cool little slice of this valley here, a little slice of Jackson Hole and the traditions that they have here. Okay, the next thing to do is to camp in Grand Teton. So the reason why you want to do this is to save a lot of coin, because Jackson Hole and the town of Jackson are very expensive places to stay. The cheapest places you'll find are around $400 a night. Maybe you can find something cheaper if you start really early in the year and get a real budget hotel, but even the budget hotels during the busy season are going to get up around $400 a night or more. Some of the places, it's not uncommon to have hotels that are $1,000 a night or more. So we have chosen to camp here for the last 2 nights in Grand Teton. In the park, there are campgrounds that are about $40 a night. There are about 8 campgrounds in the park. The 2 largest ones are Coulter Bay up north, and where we are right now, which is called Grovant. Looks like Gross Venture, but it is pronounced Grovant. But there are some other campgrounds. They're all on a reservation system. Now, just outside of the park is Forest Service land, and those are all first come, first serve. They have plenty of campgrounds as well. First come, first serve on those. Now, if you want to know more about camping in Grand Teton, I've done another video explaining all of it for you, as well as a really detailed article that I've written on my website, we'reintherockies.com. Okay, the next thing to do is to visit the Jackson Lake Lodge. This is the lodge behind me here, and this is on the north end of Grand Teton National Park. This is a really amazing lodge from the inside. Now, the outside actually doesn't look all that great. Don't let that deceive you. When you go inside, the lobby is really amazing. It's very tall, and then it's got these tall windows where you can look out and see the Tetons. It's really an amazing view and a cool place to visit, even if you're not staying here. Now, the other thing you can do here is you can eat. So they have actually, I think, 3 or 4 little restaurants or lounges in there. So they have a fine dining room called the Mural Room, which does have all these murals along the wall. And there you can actually sit in that dining room and look out at the Tetons. So we had breakfast there this morning. It's a buffet breakfast, a little less expensive than the dinners. So this has kind of been our little hack, or our little way of getting into some of these fine dining rooms in these national park lodges without paying those expensive dinner prices. Food is not all that big of a deal to us, but we kind of like the experience of going into some of these cool rooms with the views and all that. So we've done some breakfasts in some of these places, and then they have some grills and some lounges, places to drink, and then just in the lobby you can just sit on the couches and relax. So you know, don't sleep on the Jackson Lake Lodge if you're in the north end here, even if you're not staying. Stop in and check it out.
Next up is Dubois, Wyoming. We are heading out of Grand Teton on our way to Lander, Wyoming, but our wonderful river guide Jim told us that we needed to stop at the Cowboy Cafe in Dubois to get some pie. So my observations about Dubois: this is a really cute little town. I mean, it's western, it's a 1-street town, but lots of log structures, lots of cute little restaurants and gift shops. And I mean, I definitely would prefer to stay here over Jackson Hole. So I went into the Cowboy Cafe. It's noon on a Tuesday, and it was packed. I could tell there were locals and tourists alike in there, and the food looked and smelled amazing, but we're a little full from eating at the Mural Room this morning. So I got me some chocolate pecan pie. We also got some raspberry peach pie, and I'm gonna give this a try right now and tell you what I think. That's some good pie. Highly recommend.
Okay, the next thing to do here is the National Museum of Military Vehicles. This is just outside of Dubois. What this is just what the name says. It is a huge museum containing a ton of different military vehicles. But it is way more than just that. So when I was researching this, I was trying to figure out how much time I needed to do this, and I didn't look up a ton of pictures or videos or anything like that about it. I was just trying to figure out kind of what it was, and my guess was that it was just going to be a big collection of military vehicles, maybe out in a lot or something like that. No, this is a world-class museum, one of the best museums we've ever been to. Even Cheryl, who's not into war, said it was like the best museum that she's ever been to. It's massive. So behind me, you can see the warehouse here, that big building, which is where the museum is. I I shouldn't call it a warehouse. It is, again, a very nice, well done museum inside there with displays and, oh my gosh, like they take you through many of the different wars in American history. So the very first thing you see is an actual rifle from the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And that rifle cost almost $500,000 to purchase to put in this museum. And then it takes you through the entire history of World War II and D-Day and all the major events with all of the different types of vehicles that the military would have used during that time. They also cover other wars like Vietnam, the Korean War, a little bit on World War I. It is just mind-blowing. There's just so many tanks and other vehicles that are on display here. And again, it's not just about the vehicles. They've really done an amazing job of showing the displays and giving an interpretation of them and teaching you. They have videos, they have planes and helicopters flying overhead. They have the Vietnam area. One of the coolest things I thought, you walk through a jungle, through the bamboo jungle. I am doing a poor job of explaining how great this museum is. Now here's the crazy thing, this museum is privately run. Some really wealthy guy created this museum. I mean, I cannot believe that it's run privately, that it's not some sort of a connection to Smithsonian or supported by the government or something like that. He has just done a remarkable job. And here's the other crazy thing, it just opened in May of this year, 2022. Technically they opened earlier, but COVID made things so difficult that they kind of had the grand opening just this year in May of 2022. And here's the other thing is, again, I didn't know how much time to allot to this as we were coming through this valley. We're headed from Dubois, actually Grand Teton, down to Lander, Wyoming, and I just didn't know how much time to allot to this. Word of warning, if you come here, you need to allot quite a bit of time to see this, and I'm talking like half a day or more if you are even just slightly into military vehicles, history, or even just museums. It's fantastic, and in fact, your ticket that they give you is good for 2 days. Right when she gave me that ticket and said it was good for 2 days, I knew I had underestimated this museum. So definitely make it on your itinerary for Grand Teton if you're coming at all through this area. And then again, give it quite a bit of time, a lot of time to be able to see this thing. Okay, the next thing to do is to do a wild horse tour. So there are wild horses all over the West, and most of them are on public land that is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. They actually extend back all the way back to the 1600s when the Spaniards brought the horses over, and some of them escaped, and they've been roaming the Wild West ever since. And so they actually, since the 1970s, have been protected by a law. You can't kill off these horses in wild burrows that are roaming around. But the problem is, with the Bureau of Land Management and all that, is that the wild horses are overgrazing the land. So the numbers are kind of exploding, and they are in a bit of a bind. There's too many of these horses out there grazing too much land. This is a wildly political situation, actually, between environmentalists and animal rights activists and farmers and ranchers and the states and the federal government. It's a crazy complicated thing. But what's happening is that the Bureau of Land Management is trying to reduce the number of horses that are on this land, roaming on this land and overgrazing, and trying to find homes for these horses. So this here is called the Wind River Wild Horse Range. And what they've done is they have accepted a bunch of horses, over 200 of these wild horses from the Bureau of Land Management, and have put them on their ranch, basically, so that they at least have a home to graze where they're relatively free to roam. Now the cool thing is you can come here and they'll take you on a tour. And so came here and she loaded us up on their Polaris Ranger and drove us out to the ranch here where the horses are roaming around. This is a totally different experience than the one we went on in Cody, Wyoming. So there's a wild horse range there in Cody that is actually just Bureau of Land Management area, but you can still book a tour to go on that one, and they'll just take you out and try to find these wild roaming horses in a large area, and they'll just go try to find them. And you can't get very close to those ones in Cody. That's called the McCulloch Peaks horse herd, and you can't get very close to those ones. But here you can. So they'll take you on the four-wheeler right out there, and although they are wild, they're at least, you know, used to being around people, because these people, they do have to move them around a little bit so that they're not overgrazing on the land, so that they have food to eat. So they're kind of used to it. So it's kind of cool. You go out there, they've even given some of them names, and let's see, Trouble came up and wanted me to pet him for a while, and then there was a couple who were just kind of putting their heads in our four-wheeler, and our kids were really having a good time. One of them scratched his butt right next to Cheryl on the four-wheeler. That was pretty funny. And so, and they kind of caused trouble. The reason why they have named the one horse Trouble is because he's stolen some seats and broken some of the parts on the four-wheeler, so that's kind of funny. Now these horses that you see behind me here, these are actually mostly younger horses who already have a home, so they've come here for kind of a temporary holding, and then they're going to be adopted out to some private people who are adopting. So anybody, you included, can adopt a horse or a wild burro from the Bureau of Land Management. In fact, that's kind of one of the reasons why this situation here, this Wind River Horse Sanctuary exists, is because they're trying to kind of get the word out that, hey, you can adopt these horses and give them a home. And so it is possible. In fact, the Bureau of Land Management will pay you to adopt them a lot of times, because again, they're just trying to get rid of these. There's so many horses, so many more horses than the land can handle, that they're just trying to kind of find a home for these horses and donkeys and stuff. This is their final resting place, basically. They're just kind of roaming this land here. So this was really interesting to me because I thought, you know, it was going to be a lot like the Cody tour where they were just going to be very far away. But what's really cool about this one is you get right up close to them and get to know them a little bit and have a little fun with them. Definitely something to do if you're in the Lander area.
Next up is to visit the SACAJAWEA graveside. Now actually right here we've got SACAJAWEA and then two of her sons buried next to her. Now the truth of it is that we're not 100% sure where SACAJAWEA is buried. There's actually very little known about when she was born or when she died, but we do know that she was a very, very important role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. Now many people believe that she was a guide, but she wasn't. She was an interpreter, and she spoke languages with other tribes and was able to communicate and make deals. And you know, as we've been on this trip, we went to the Museum of the Mountain Man, and how a lot of times I really think what a pivotal role she played, because when they talk about mountain men coming into the area, some of them had very positive relationships with the Native Americans, and other times they fought. And I think that without SACAJAWEA, I think a lot of their encounters with the Native Americans could have turned violent, but they had a wonderful interpreter. And just a little personal note, Matt's always the one giving all of the history lessons on our channel, but I was actually a history major too. In fact, we met in a history class, but I do remember that I wrote a paper about SACAJAWEA as a college student, and it was my very first history report I ever wrote where I used the internet. But that kind of makes me sound really old, and it's true. I remember thinking, this is fantastic. There's all these resources on SACAJAWEA. But she's always been a woman I've admired, and I think it's wonderful that even if this may not be her grave, it's a wonderful spot to come and honor her.
Okay, the next thing to do is to visit Lander, Wyoming. This is actually a little bit of a larger town compared to some of the ones we've been to. It's not quite as large as Jackson, but almost. But it's a lot less touristy than Jackson, of course. You know, it's a pretty clean town. We drove down Main Street. It looked like a nice little Old West town, kind of fit in with a lot of the Wyoming towns. There's a lot to do around Lander and nearby Riverton. So we did the Wind River horse tour. We went to the graves of SACAJAWEA and Chief Washakie up the road. In Lander and Riverton, there's more things to do. There's some museums like the Museum of the American West. There's some Native American cultural centers. There's another mountain man rendezvous site there. So there's a lot to do. We're not able to do everything, and I think my family's kind of worn out right now. So we've just come up to a very easy little state park called Sinks Canyon State Park. And this is actually a pretty cool little spot here. So what happens is the river comes down and then it sinks into the mountain. It just sinks into the ground. So they call that the sinks. And then about a half a mile down the way here, which is where we're standing here, it comes up. And so you can just see here the water bubbling up and then flows down into town. And then trout are in this river here, and they swim upstream, but they get stopped at the place here where it rises. They call this the rise. And so this is a fun little spot. You can actually buy some food for the fish here for 25 cents or something like that, and toss it down to the trout to feed them. A nice little, just easy way to drive up the canyon and see a couple of cool little spots here. There are some hikes and some waterfalls up the canyon. A lot more to do in this area, but again, we don't have all that much time. Okay, the next thing to do is to visit South Pass City, Wyoming. So this sits just outside of the Wind Rivers. It's actually between Lander and Pinedale. Now, South Pass City, there's actually two things that are kind of historically significant about this. So first of all, this is along the Oregon Trail. So as Oregon and California and Mormon Trail people were heading out west, getting through the Rockies was the great challenge. And so they ended up finding this spot here that comes through Wyoming called South Pass. That was the easiest spot to get through the Rockies. This became the thoroughfare, the highway of that Oregon, California Mormon Trail. About 20 or 30 years later, they actually discovered gold here and set up a mining camp and a little city. And today, that city is kind of a ghost town, although there actually are some inhabitants here and has been continuously inhabited since 1869. I think it's Wyoming's second oldest city or something like that. But the ghost town section here has been turned into a state park and is a really well-maintained, really cool little spot to visit here, and it feels like it's completely in the middle of nowhere, but kind of a cool little spot. One thing to understand is the West is really big, and so a lot of people have a very difficult time planning out their days and getting around from point A to point B around here when they come out to visit some of these national parks. We have many resources to help you. We sell travel guides for the national parks, but we also offer trip consulting, so personal consulting, where we will help you create an itinerary for your trip based on our knowledge of all these places that we've been visiting in the West. Check out our website, we'rintherockies.com. Click on the consultation link at the top there, and you'll just fill out your details, and we will meet with you with a Zoom meeting to get your itinerary planned out. Could be Cheryl and I, it could be my parents who have traveled much more than I have and are well familiar with the Rockies. We want to help you out. That's our mission here, is to help you have a great vacation to the West, and we have many resources to do so. So check that out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, go West, young traveler.